Welcome back, my friends, to the sweet spot where IT leaders share the insight with other leaders and others that want to lead. My name is Carlos Vargas, and as every week, we have our two co-hosts, Howard Holton and Paul Lewis. Hello, guys.
Hey
How's it
there.
going?
Football or soccer?
Neither.
Football.
Like American football, Paul?
No, that's just how I describe the game of kicking a black and white ball down a field. I refer to it as football. Canadian is very European in that sense.
Right. In which senses is Canadian not European?
The prairies is much more like the prairies of the U.S.
It's true. That you could even argue that that's Mongolian.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
Yep.
we built nothing for hundreds of miles. Welcome to our prairies.
Fields after fields after fields.
So I believe it's FIFA week, right? Like FIFA
correct.
month. I don't know how long FIFA goes on.
World Cup.
I know World
FIFA,
Cup. Yes.
FIFA
whatever.
all year round.
Whatever. you can see how much I care about this. I only know two things about the World Cup currently. One, it's criminal that they built it in Qatar and killed so many slaves to build the stadiums. And two, the Japanese fans cleaned up the stadium without it even being their game, which I thought was one of the coolest things I've seen. For all the negative stuff I've seen attached to FIFA and the World Cup lately, watching the Japanese fans go through the stadium with trash bags and clean up someone else's game was pretty cool.
Interesting. I haven't seen that. I heard the other part, but I didn't see that.
Yeah, I'm a little I'm not a soccer fan, so I kind of think my opinion shouldn't matter. At the same time, I am still a human, and FIFA is such a corrupt organization. It really should be closed, shuttered, and everyone that works in administration at FIFA should no longer be able to work in any professional sport in any capacity ever. I mean, even amateur sports, I think they shouldn't be able to work in. Like, if the head of FIFA gets fired and banned from professional sports and decides he wants to manage his kids' 8 and under soccer league, he should be banned from that too.
It is a fair and true statement. There is a really good Netflix documentary on the depths of FIFA and how far the corruption has gone from its inception, including the Qatar and the Russia World Cups.
Yeah, it's pretty rough, right?
Yep. Originally, it was supposed to be in the summer. So imagine winning in Doha, in a city in 130-degree Fahrenheit, with none of the stadiums built, none of the infrastructure to house anybody, not enough hotel rooms to support the fans, and yet still winning against the United States, against Japan, against England, who clearly already have the appropriate infrastructure for a World Cup.
Yeah.
I'm going to say at least Russia had the infrastructure, even though it was an inappropriate place to go.
Sure.
Yep. They liken it to, Nazi Germany winning the Olympics in whenever it was, 32.
Yeah. So I found that interesting. So Jesse Owens absolutely hated effectively the U.S. administration after the Olympics because he swept a whole bunch of events,
right?
And he said even Hitler, who hated blacks and hated the Jews and pretty much hated everybody, came up and shook his hand, and his own president wouldn't shake his hand.
That's interesting.
No, that's criminal.
That's the excitement of the Olympics, I guess.
It's not to the criminal level of the Qatar and FIFA in today's day and age, right? But it is still criminal. It is still like dude set world records that couldn't be touched in a dozen events or however many events he set them in. He at least deserves a handshake. Go, if it really bothers you that bad, use a wipe. But he deserves a handshake. He deserves some freaking respect.
Yeah.
And to not give the man respect is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right?
Especially since he was there on your behalf, right? There on the country's behalf. Yeah.
Correct. He's part of the U.S. Olympic team.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
So how do we look at that from from an executive leadership position when we have people that, let's say, they may be doing great things, but you're not in agreement with something that they do?
No, but this isn't in agreement with what they do, right? I mean, the Jesse Owens thing is who he is, right?
Well, or who the
Um,
person is.
and so I think that's a really big problem in leadership, right? I think bias is a pretty big issue in leadership, right?
Yep.
And I think this is a time of reflection. It's a time of community, right? Thanksgiving in the U.S. and Thanksgiving recently in the Great White North, and the upcoming Christmas holiday should give us some time with family and some time with those we consider family, and allow us to reflect on community. And it's probably not a bad idea, right? To take a few minutes and think about: did you act honorably this year? Did you act ethically this year? Did you act to overcome your biases? Right? Anyone that says they're not biased in any way is smoking something, or selling a bridge, or running for office. Right? In other words, they're just lying. The fact is, we're all baked with biases, and some of them we can get over, and some of them we can't, and we really should work to get over as many of them as we possibly can, and at least address the ones we can. Right? When you look around your kind of leadership, does it look like a reflection of you? Right? Could you swap someone for someone else and not notice the change? In which case, you probably have some bias going on there.
Right.
You know what I mean? If everyone has the same accent, if everyone speaks the same way, if everyone speaks the same first language, if everyone's the same color, if everyone's the same gender, if everyone sees themselves as the same gender, right? If you have 12 people that report to you that are part of your kind of leadership group, and you don't have anyone that identifies as LGBTQ plus, probably some work to do on your part, right? And I'll admit it's entirely reasonable that there's no one fit for the role within the organization. But have you ever thought about it? Right?
Yeah.
Have you ever gone to HR and said, "Hey, HR, stop giving me the same people. Give me some diversity."
It is interesting. I had a dinner with a dozen CIO CTOs last night, and we're just talking about sort of the pain and sacrifice and fun and enjoyment of the role. And there was 3 themes that came out through the entire 3 hours. So theme number 1, culture is harder than it ever has been to build within an organization.
Agreed.
That diversity is a problem, and we haven't figured out how to solve it.
Agreed.
And lastly, there was not one CIO in the room that said, there's somebody on my team that could take over for me. That there's a gap, significant gap, and in fact, it's growing between my direct reports or sending anyone else in IT and someone who could do my job for 2 reasons. One, there's not enough direct influence in encouraging people to take on that role. And 2, the role of CIO has changed so dramatically in the last 5 years, it's hard for anybody to catch up, let alone the CIO to catch up. And those 3 factors has been the, what do I do next year? What do I do the following year, given what seems to be an impossible task? Your thoughts on those 3?
Okay, so the first one was
Culture.
first one. Oh yeah. So I think the one thing work from home has really done is damaged any concerted attempt at building culture that started before or relied on assumptions from the before time. Right. Like, so much of building a culture relies on people seeing each other as an extended community, or just a community, much less an extended community, and that's gone with work from home. Right. Before work from home, I never saw the attitude expressed online, just let me do my job and don't talk to me. And now I see I won't work anywhere that they won't just let me do my job and not talk to me. Right. Which I find bizarre. Right. I see more comments of leave me alone and let me do my job than I miss the community that I got when I was in the office. Right. And frankly, that's been our biggest community as humans for the last 40 years. right? The people we see in the office is our most tactile community because we've broken the neighborhoods, right? I have no
barely
idea who
know
my
my
neighbors
neighbors.
are, right? I know the person who lives there, and I like him, and I know the person that lives there, and they're just okay, and the person that lives across the street's a Republican crazy person. Like during election season, it looks like a bunch of racist pinatas broke on their lawn and stuck signs in the ground. Like it's horrible.
Right.
And I don't really like 2 doors down. They own the Indian food restaurant, but they're not very personable. And then I really don't know anybody else, right? And that's not unique to me. Like my neighbors don't know any of the neighbors other than the few they know, and and that's just kind of the way neighborhoods are, right? I have no friends that are like, no, like we do block parties and know everybody.
Right.
The one exception is those that have small children tend to know those in the neighborhood with other small children.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, but once the kids don't play together anymore, then that's gone. And people don't buy a house and live in it forever anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like our parents bought a
They move
house
every
and then
2 years.
yeah. And now they move every 2 to 5 years, right? I want to say the average in the US is 5 years. But
It's got to be less than 5 years. 5 seems like a long time.
Well, but there's still a lot of people that are
That's
just
true.
buying and banking their houses, right? So average it probably changes based on the demographic. Like
Right. Sure.
sub 30 is 3 years, 30 to 35 is 2 years, 35 to 4, like it probably depends.
Right.
And then it also depends on what age the children are, because you don't want to pull them from school to school.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, right? That means that the most lasting relationships we have and most constant are those we develop in the office, and that helps us build culture, and that helps us get exposed to diverse perspectives, even if the perspectives still come from people that look like us. They still tend to be more diverse than we find online, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now all we have is online, and online is nothing but echo. It's endless echo chambers as far as the mouse can find, right? Which is the worst possible thing. And then you spend 8 hours in an echo chamber. How are you going to build a culture to bring people together to overcome that when it's still a virtual thing, and really it's not a virtual thing that I chose.
Right.
It's a virtual thing that was chosen for me.
Is
Yeah.
that
So
something that we can change as leaders, or is that something that the company need to decide? Like, let's say one leader, an executive, can they start, even though their company may not be doing it, can they start implementing or making those changes to bring their direct reports into a better culture and then influence the rest?
No, but that's the problem, right? Is the definition of culture has to change. And I think that's the big problem, is we don't really know, like society, there's not enough good research that says this is how you overcome that, right? There's not enough research that says this is what the long-term effects of this is, or this is what the real change is, right? It's all anecdotal at this point, right? It's all 1,000 points of light saying we see the same thing, but not real research being done to say this is what it is, this is what the damage, and this is how you overcome it. And so there's not really good guidance on how to overcome it. There's a bunch of thoughts, right? But there's not any real good guidance on how to overcome it. And ultimately, I think that's part of the problem, is to build a culture, we have to do it using rules that have been established. And there are no current rules for this, right? So we're all just kind of guessing. Are there things you can do? Sure. Are there things that you could do that will work? Maybe. But what works for one person isn't necessarily likely to work for another. Like that's the thing. There's no real blueprint.
yeah.
Where before there was a definite blueprint.
One could top down constraints / guardrails and influence, right? I can say, here are the principles of the organization. Here's what's acceptable and not acceptable. That's the guardrails, right? And then your influences say, well, I'm going to walk the walk. I'm going to treat people this way. And therefore the expectation is people treat people this way, whether it's how I treat customers, how I treat employees, how I treat anybody, right? That won't create culture. That's just creating the walls to which, it's creating the rules to say, are you on
boundaries,
board?
Right? We're setting boundaries. That's what we're
exactly doing. What it doesn't do is change the mindset of the employees who have moved from this is my 35-year career to this is my job for now.
Yeah.
And since we've been doing a lot of corporate restructuring recently, in fact, the last decade of corporate restructuring, and they've had 15 bosses in the last 15 months, that there's very few allegiances that actually get built both with your manager and with the company. Right. So now you have a loosey-goosey relationship between the employee and the company, loosey-goosey relationship between the employee and the manager, and not a long-term foundational sort of stability in the employee to stay with that company. So now you have effectively a loosey-goosey culture, which
Correct.
is very hard to overcome.
Yeah, it's hard to establish a culture when you see people in person for moments, not hours,
Right.
per week, not per day, right? And the company does nothing to say they wish to retain people long term, right? The first thing we did to say we wanted to retain people long term, we gave them a freaking pension, right? Pensions are dead and gone. There's no corporate pensions anymore, right? Even the pensions that do exist in kind of larger union organizations that are outside the U.S. Like you get a pension in the UK, but that's because they have a workers' union, right? We don't have that in the U.S. And so that first thing went away. So there's no real motivator to have me stay at the same company for 20 years.
Right.
There's never really been one for 10 years. The only thing that really exists is stock options, and those are done on a 3-year cycle.
Right.
So 3 years is considered long. And the expectation is once your initial stock vests, you're leaving.
Right. And
right?
what percentage of employees actually get that? Small.
Sure. And I'm sorry, it's 4 years for most, not 3. My bad. Like Amazon's really 4 years, and so is most of FANG. But that's not a long time, right? And the expectation is most people won't achieve it. The expectation is I can keep tech workers for 18 months to 2 years, right? And we're actually taught now that if they stay longer than 2 years, I have to question whether that's my A team, whether they're actually hypos, right? Whether they're high performers, because my high performers are on that 18 months to 2 year track. And we do nothing to stop it. We do nothing to shortcut it. We do nothing to say, no. Those are the exact people I want to retain. I'm going to keep them, and this is what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of it, we have to build a culture with people who are now expecting to be there for 2 years, who are motivated by a trajectory that's impossible to maintain because nobody has that number of openings, right? I can't move everyone into a VP role. I don't have that many VP roles. And I have to do it in moments of a day over a virtual device rather than hours in person, right? And so I think what we refer to as culture really needs a definition change. And we were already bad at culture to begin with. Like, let's also be honest, right? It's not like we were banging culture just out of the park, right? We were already trying to build something that people wanted to work with, and now everything's changed, and we haven't got a clue what we're doing.
Right.
So I agree, Paul. I think culture is darn near impossible to build, and really, like, most companies fail at their own, culture and culture value statement, right? Even if we just take values and say the values provide guardrails, most companies fail miserably at those values.
And bad leaders make it worse, right? Musk comes in, kills off 50% of the team, then forces the other 50% to sign a document in 24 hours that they're willing to work 80 hours a week,
which most of them didn't sign. So the estimation is 87% of people who worked at Twitter the day Elon Musk took over will no longer work at Twitter when the clock runs out on that letter.
Right. So that's just creating more negative vibes throughout not just Twitter, but the rest of sort of IT organizations.
Well, and then Meta laid off a bunch of people, and Amazon laid off a bunch of people, and insert name of company laid off a bunch of people, right? Kind of everyone's doing these massive layoffs, and it went from we can't find good people to now there's a bunch of people, and I don't know how to tell if they're any good.
Right. And I still can't afford them. That's the irony.
Correct. Correct. And they came from the highest paid companies on the planet, and so I still can't afford them.
Right.
It'd be a really good time to build some awesome consulting companies.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I'd be scooping those people up and shoveling them into the consulting company bucket, right?
BCG from zero to nothing.
Right. In like a weekend,
Right.
And I could effectively do it with no MBAs. It'd be amazing. Be the greatest consulting company ever built.
Right. All practitioners,
all practitioners. No recent grad students building the same PowerPoint decks. Like it'd be amazing. You could rule the world in 3 years.
So the first one was culture, and I agree that's feels like an insurmountable task at the moment. I'm not saying it's not solvable, but it's tough. The second one being diversity. Yes, we have a goal. Yes, we have a wish. Yes, we want this to be true. But also, yes, I don't have a plan. Yes, I don't have a program. Yes, I don't really know what to do if somebody told me I had to do it.
Right.
So now what?
Yep.
What's my plan? Because I don't have a plan.
Yeah, DIE or DEI, diversity, equality, inclusion is
Yep.
I find it more insurmountable than culture. Right. Ultimately, I can only pick from the resumes that I get. Ultimately, I can only like I'm still limited. I'm still bound, and it's not like there's well-known excluded pools of potential employees, right? Like it's not like everybody gathers in 3 locations based on the facets of DEI, and we only shop from one.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, is LinkedIn all like white Asian males? Like is it exclusionary to people of color and females? Like, if it is, cool. Where do those people go? Because obviously I'm not one of them. I'm on LinkedIn. And like all of this is so just tell me where to go. Like I'm happy to change the recruiting, but no one has a good method. No one has a good system, and no one has any really kind of good answers. Work is the only answer, but that's not really a good answer. I can still only process the information that I get.
Yep.
Right.
And
even if
people are
I say
forgetting that most of us CIOs are not CIO of major organizations in Silicon Valley, right? We're not getting 20,000 applications per role. We're getting 5.
and I don't have a chief DEI officer.
Right.
Like I don't have an executive level position for diversity. Sure, HR has a diversity movement, and we have a diversity value, but ultimately I still have the same problem. How do I recruit people that are diverse if my current pool of applicants isn't? Right.
How do we know? Is it just that they're not applying, or that they're not passing all the gatekeepers so they can be hired? Like, I was invited to a panel last week specifically on that topic, but on the media side, because of the
Sure.
podcast and everything that I do. And I was part of the topic. Is it that we're not going through all the gates, or is that people don't think that they can get to those executive positions because of their race, their color, their language?
I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows, right? I mean, I will say I think a lot of the gates are stupid.
Because
Right.
I'm looking at it, and if I remember correctly, you're half Mexican. I am Puerto Rican.
I am half Mexican by marriage only.
So
Right. You're not biologically Mexican, is what you're saying.
That is correct. I grew up in a Mexican family.
Right.
As one of 3 very, very white people.
Right. You're culturally Mexican, but not by biologically Mexican.
So you're one of us.
Correct.
Ándale, mano.
Yeah. Unless we want this to totally degrade into the worst possible Spanish in the world, I think we should probably retain the current language. But it's a big freaking problem, right? But the gates themselves are a big problem, right? I will give you an example. Not so long ago, I applied for a job that was exactly the job I held at Hitachi. They wanted someone to come in and build an enterprise architecture team for a pre-sales organization.
It sounds like something you could do.
Right. To which I said, here's everything I've done. And oh, by the way, I did exactly that. And here were the results within the first year, because I had that dashboard. Right. And they said, we've decided to go a different way. That was the totality of the communication. And I'm like, while I get it, I'm not butthurt about it. I don't actually care. At the same time, how many people in this country have exactly that experience?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's got to be like 3.
Right.
right?
And
That,
maybe
that
they
could
hit the 3.
well, that could possibly even be willing to interview at the same time. Like, shouldn't you interview them?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if somebody goes, no, I have exactly the experience that you're looking for in a really narrow field, shouldn't you just go, that might be worth a call? I'm not
Right.
positive. You know what I mean? Which tells me that the gatekeeping that's going on is so much greater than just that fits under diversity,
Right.
right? And the diversity layered on top of that doesn't help, right? The gatekeeping that happens on top of that does not help. That makes it significantly harder. I can't, I couldn't imagine going through the standard bullshit gates that are obviously aren't helping, only to end up with additional bigotry gates on top of it.
But that's outside in. What Carlos, I think, was talking about was inside up. Right? How are we looking at our own sort of bias, conscious or unconscious, to say, how do I ensure that the varying degrees of leadership levels have the appropriate thought and demographic diversification that matters to the organization? Are we putting enough emphasis in ensuring those things happen, even if what's coming outside in is hurting the situation, not helping the situation?
Sure. So okay. But I think now it's just amplification. If 5% of my workforce qualifies for 20% of my workforce qualifies for DEI globally, and 10% or 5% of that is in IT, right?
Right.
What do I do if I have no candidates that have leadership skills, qualities, or interest?
That's a
Because
problem.
that's often what I'm faced with, right?
Right.
Okay, I got one role I can promote to. I have no one other than, like 90% of the organization is the same people we currently have in leadership. And
Yep.
of the 10%, that 10%, there's no one that's even remotely qualified for the role. And I don't mean, I like the 70% bar, right? If you're going to get promoted, the most qualified candidate you could possibly be is 70%. Right, because you need to be able to grow into the role. Otherwise, if it's 100%, you're already ready for the next role. What's the point?
Right.
Right.
As long as we're checking the bias box, right? We're saying, am I looking at these candidates fairly through a lens outside of my own experience? Because sometimes that's the least appropriate lens.
Agreed.
I don't know these 5 people because they're 3 levels below me. It's hard to really tell whether they're ready or not.
For sure. But if I'm actively looking to increase the quantity of perspectives I get, and that tends to be the way that I look at that, right? I'm actively looking to get different perspectives. So I'm actively looking for people with different perspectives when those roles come up, and I find 0 people qualified even to say the 40th percentile for the role. Like it is in fact an outside in problem, far more I think than it is an inside up problem. Inside up, there's so little I can do about it. I can change me, but if the candidate still doesn't exist, I don't know what to do. Right. And my job can't be solely focused on DEI, which is what it would take to turn candidates that are 20% qualified into candidates that are 50% qualified, to then open roles that fit the candidates to promote, to then continue. You know what I mean? Like I can't, a CIO can't be a full-time mentor. It can't be our full-time job. And that's kind of what would have to happen to do that. Or you'd have to change every leader to have 25% of their time being mentoring those specific people, so that we could create those candidates. And I'm not sure I'm not sure anyone has 25% of their time.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I'm not saying I have any answers, and I'm certainly not saying what we have is good enough, nor do we just do nothing. Right.
So again, another challenge without obvious answers, but if we don't fix, it's going to lead to significant future problems, which leads us to the third challenge, which I wasn't convinced until I heard 11 other people in the room tell me it was true. Right.
Okay.
I actually wasn't convinced at the start of that dinner that there was such a huge gap between the CIO and CTO and the next CIO and CTO in that team. I am now way more convinced. I'm way more convinced that not only is there an experiential gap between those two, between the set of VPs that they might be reporting to them and the CIO, but that the expectation of the CIO has changed so dramatically in the last 5 years that it would be difficult for anybody to catch up to that responsibility. In fact, the existing CIOs are having a hard time catching up to being that new role set, let alone having other people do that. And if A, do you believe that's true? And B, is there anything we can do about that?
So there was a lot of A, do I believe that's true? Like
Okay.
there was so many things you brought up. So hang on, I'll address them, but I think the answer is yes, just blanketly, right? And then I think if we break them down, right? Okay, so existing CEOs living up to the new expectation of the CEO, is that hard? And are they in the 70th percentile? And I think the answer is it is hard, and no, they're not in the 70th percentile.
Right.
There are a lot of terrible CIOs and CTOs that are struggling to really understand what it means to be a CIO and a CTO today. Right. And they were perfectly good 5 years ago or 10 years ago in that role. But the role has changed, and then the people have also changed, right? Like you spent the last 15 years of your career preparing for a CIO role that no longer exists, and once you got your shot, you stepped into it and went, "This is no. I signed up to be the GM of a baseball team. I don't know shit about football."
Right.
You know what I mean? And all of a sudden, you're managing a football team, right? Like it's the Ted Lasso problem, right?
Good callback.
And the reality is Ted Lasso was good at it because Ted Lasso is a phenomenal leader.
Right.
And that kind of brings me to the one thing that we talk about a lot, right? We don't spend enough time fostering leadership skills.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We need more Ted Lassos in this world. Right? Ted Lasso spends 0% of his time actually concerned about the game of football.
Right.
Why?
Because he doesn't even know the rules.
He has no clue. And he's fine with it. He's super comfortable with saying, no, I don't know what that is. Right? Like, Ted, can you explain the offside rule? No, I'm still looking for someone who can explain it to me. Right? He doesn't try to make something up. Nothing. He just goes, no. Like Beard knows the offside rule.
Right.
Right? Like everybody else knows the offside rule. What's one more person who knows the offside rule going to help?
Right.
Right? And yet somehow we think CIOs should know the offside rule.
Right.
Why? Right? It's cool that they do, but how about they know the leadership part first? Right? How about they know the thing that's most critical? And no one's really defined what the most critical is. Right? So I'm going to say today the most critical is you're a really good leader and mentor. Those two things. They're very different, but somewhat complementary. So let's say the most important thing is you're a really good leader and mentor. There are people that can do everything else. Right? You don't need to be the most fiscally conservative person or the fiscally conscious person. You have an office of the CIO, which has a CFO in it, to do that job.
Yep.
Trust that they know how to do their job. Lead and mentor spectacularly well. Then communicate across and take communication across. So communicate what the value is of IT and the things that you're working on to the business, and listen to the business about what they say is important to them in general and specifically within the realm of technology. What do they wish technology could accomplish for them? CIOs are terrible at that. CTOs terrible at that. CISOs even worse. Right? Learn to communicate up so that your CEO is confident and your board is confident in what you know how to do. And that would probably solve 90% of the kind of CIO challenge and the uncertainty about what to do as a CIO. And then the second part then is, do we have anyone that's the next CIO after us? Right? Do we have a leader in waiting? Well, if I don't do the first part, how could I possibly ever do the second part? You know what I mean?
But don't you think that's the rub? That we've spent 40 years in this practice of being a CIO and CTO, being a master of the art, right? Having a really deep understanding of what it means to run and operate IT, and spending far less time, there are exceptions, but far less time on non-IT leadership skills, that now that it's a requirement for the role, right? Now that I'm asked to do things that are way outside of the IT domain and participating at the executive council, that I should be doing that, but I don't have those skills. It's not what I do. I'm not Ted Lasso. I am Beard, right? I am that new dude. What's the ex-footballer?
Nate the Great or Roy Kent?
Roy. Yeah, I'm Roy. I'm the best footballer in the world, or at least I was, right? And that's where I spend my quality time. That's not creating another assistant coach. Right? That's not creating a replacement for Ted. So how do I obtain that skill if I'm Roy?
But I would actually argue that Beard was not creating that replacement for Ted. Right? Beard could never be Ted Lasso, but the reason, and neither could Nate the Great, right? Nate could never be Ted Lasso, right? But that's why that's why Roy Kent works, because Roy actually could be the next Ted Lasso.
You think,
right?
So?
And I absolutely do. If you look at the show,
that sounds interesting.
That's why he was given. So for those who aren't caught up on all things Ted Lasso,
spoiler
welcome to a new Ted Lasso podcast. So Ted Lasso is a TV show on Apple TV Plus. As the holidays are coming up, and you're probably likely to spend more time at home and have a little bit more free time, sign up for a free trial. Watch it. You can watch both seasons in 7 days. It's no problem. You will want to watch both seasons in 7 days. Matter of fact, you might watch both seasons in 3 days and then rewatch both seasons in the next 3 days. I promise you, it is that good. So the fundamental of Ted Lasso is Ted Lasso gets hired as the head coach, manager of a premier football league team in the UK. Ted Lasso's coaching experience has only ever been at the amateur level. He took a D series college football team to their first ever national championship, got some internet fame for how they celebrated. Ted knows nothing about football, about soccer, nothing. I mean, nothing. He's never coached at any level, amateur or pro, and he takes over, and he's in the UK. He's never even been to the UK. Right? He's never been to England in his entire life. Knows very little to nothing about it, and he's this fish out of water. And normally you would laugh at him. Like we always laughed at Mr. Bean. We always laughed at everyone put in that situation, right? When Monty Python did a skit, Fish Out of Water, you laughed at the fish.
Right.
And so you think you're going to laugh at the fish. And you know what you never do? You never actually laugh at the fish. You laugh at everyone around him that doesn't get that this is actually the right fish.
Right.
Right. This is actually
Everything
the fish
he's
thing.
doing is correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you almost immediately come along, and then you watch as others start to come along as well. One of those characters, so Beard is his assistant coach. Beard comes along with him, and Beard has a beard. I'm not sure if it's his real name and he grew a beard so that it matched, or if they just changed his name to Beard because he had a beard and it was glorious. Either way, his name is Beard. Beard is incredibly quiet, incredibly thoughtful, and incredibly knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So he's definitely his right-hand man. When he's got a question about how to play the game, he turns to Beard and says, how do I, right? And then there's this kid who's like a kind of groundskeeper assistant to the team, does the towel boy thing, that all that sort of stuff, called Nate. And he nicknames him Nate the Great. And he's the first person to really acknowledge Nate. And he fosters Nate and listens to Nate, someone that no one ever listened to before. And then he fosters Roy Kent, and Roy Kent is the captain of the team when the whole thing starts. And Roy's been around forever and ever, and is a top level player who's late in his career, right? Like he's a Cal Ripken Jr., he's a he's a Babe Ruth, he's a Mickey Mantle, he's a Joe DiMaggio. But think about him after they went to the 3 teams they were really good at, and it was that last team. That's where Roy Kent is at.
Yep.
And there's one particular thing, spoilers, there's one particular episode where Ted gives everyone a book to read, and it's a book that he picked for their personality, and he gives Roy Kent A Wrinkle in Time. And A Wrinkle in Time is about a girl who has leadership thrust upon her, whether she's ready for it or not, and has to grow into being a leader because she's been selected as the leader. And it's the foreshadowing of everything that's going to come. It's the foreshadowing that Roy is not just the captain because he's the best. Roy is the captain because everybody else looks to him. And because everybody else looks to him, he is a leader. And thus that has to be fostered. right? And Ted does it in a way that Roy's not really comfortable with. It's not really Roy's kind of way to lead, but Roy doesn't like being a leader anyhow. Right. So yeah, I would say that yes, Roy Kent is absolutely the GM in waiting. Like I would not be surprised if the entire show ends, which it's either set for 3 seasons or 4 seasons. I think it's 3, and then the show's over. I would not be surprised if when it ends, Roy Kent is left as GM of what is effectively a brand new.
I guess my point is there's still work to do. Out of the box, it wouldn't have been true. There is a gap between Ted and Roy.
Sure, but we also don't work in Fantasyland, right? like we don't work in like Santa Claus the movie, where Santa Claus trains his apprentice and then determines it's time for his apprentice to take over as Santa Claus, and he retires.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I don't know of any CIO that's planned their retirement around when their mentor was ready to take the role, or planned their next role around when their mentor was ready to take the role.
Right, but what's more likely to be true in the current situation, that a CIO gets replaced by an external CIO, or a CIO gets replaced by someone he's mentored to be the CIO?
Oh no, external CIO almost every time.
But that's the problem. That's what I'm trying to highlight here, is that we're not doing enough to ensure that those next level can in fact become CIOs. And that has to be a concentrated effort on your part, not just a side gig.
But it also has to be something the board sees, and this like what is the chance that the CEO is going to be external if replaced?
Right.
Or the COO or the C whatever O is going to be replaced by someone internal? Or is it far more likely they're going to hire a professional CEO to take the place of the former professional CEO? Right? Like we have to fundamentally change the culture of the company to enable that first, and that really should be what we're doing. Right? How many companies have you seen steered wrong because they brought in a CXO that didn't understand what the hell the company really did, how it was built, what the culture was, how it operated, and just came and made sweeping changes, lasted 2 years, and then left?
Disney, yeah.
Every big company, we're constantly seeing,
Chapek and I agree.
It has become a joke that CIOs last 2 years. Right, they come in, they make a bunch of changes, it seems good, and they go to another place that pays them more money, and then the ball drops, as it were. Mm-hmm. Right, the music stops, and you found you have no musical chairs left, and so the next guy comes in and goes, well, this is messed up, makes a whole bunch of changes. Right, they seem good immediately, and then they're out in less than 2 years. Why? Because the person before them left nothing sustaining, so they leave nothing sustaining. So now I've got 2 things that aren't really sustaining, and the third person comes in and lasts even shorter, right? Because we're not really building this to be sustaining. And if from the beginning the board said, no, we're going to let this person go, but we're going to promote someone from within, and hey, let's hire an external CIO, someone who is a professional CIO, to not actually hold the reins, but to just mentor this CIO. Just get them up to the point where they are, in fact, the CIO, and then we let them go. Right, so that we've got a good CIO that knows what they're doing. Right, hire a professional mentor, build a CIO. Hire a professional mentor, build a CTO. Why is that not the method that we're using? Wouldn't that be a better method?
I was going to say
question. Probably still takes 2 years.
Right. Should we have like a junior role, like we have on the technical side, but on the leadership side, so we can grow? Like you were saying, that there's knowledge from within the company that an external person don't have. Should there be like a junior type position that is building them up to go to that next level? And it's not just at the higher ed, because you need to have other knowledge to be that top leader.
But do you really? Like, you don't have to have that knowledge. They've proven it over and over again by bringing in external CIOs. But right? They have none of the tribal knowledge when they come in.
Right. But that's why we have the problems that we have.
No, I know, but that's my point, right? Don't set junior roles. Don't bring in an external CIO. Promote the person the closest and bring in a professional mentor.
Right.
Okay.
To bridge the gap, right? You're on a 2-year contract. You're a professional CIO. You're on a 2-year contract, not to be CIO, but to make this person a successful CIO.
Right.
And then you do the same thing you would have before if you would have been brought in. It's effectively not changing anything, except you're not creating a house of cards. You're creating a dynasty.
And
right?
you can take bigger risks. You don't have to wait for the 70% person. You can get the 40% person and give them 2 years of mentorship. Yeah.
So where do you find that person that you're gonna bring to coach that CIO or that CTO?
Well, let me introduce you to the Sweet Spot Consulting, where Paul Lewis and Howard Holton will happily take their decade plus of experience and help mentor the right person that has the cultural knowledge to be that person within your organization. I mean, I'm throwing that out there now. And the three of us would have no problem finding more mentors to do that.
Right. Certainly.
Right. If someone showed up at my door and said, "We'd like right now today, I'm happy to be a part-time CXO." There's a ton of companies that don't need a full-time CIO. They don't need a full-time CTO. They don't need a full-time CISO, but they need someone that has the experience of that office to handle the strategic tasks, to turn it over to really good practitioners that exist within the organization. Happy to do that for you today. For the record, it's paid. I don't do anything for free.
So there's only so much volunteer time I have left.
Right. But like the number of companies looking for that is growing, but it's very, very small because they don't really know what they need. Right? Like CEOs don't really know what they need, and the employees do themselves a disservice. Right? Look, if you're like a 27-person company, you're not actually the CIO.
Right.
But it's very, very, very hard to truly be the CIO of a 27-person company.
Right.
Right. And you don't really do yourself any good saying you're a CXO, a CIO, and then going to an organization that has a real CIO role. Right. You're better off being a senior director. Right. You're better off being a director. It's going to serve you far, far better to be a role appropriate kind of across any level of equality, so that turns into something else of value elsewhere. And I promise you, like if you're the CIO and you never do any CIO stuff ever, and then you like throw that on your resume and you go out and try to be CIO somewhere else and you get in a couple of interviews at the director level, they're going to go, yeah, you're not really a director either. Plus you had the CIO role, so I know you're going to want to crawl and climb through the organization. I'm not going to bother with you. Right. You're just going to exclude yourself. And so
definitely not in your best interest.
No, it's really not. Right. And that doesn't mean all CIOs are the same either. Right. Paul, you and I couldn't be more different as CIO. It doesn't change the fact that we're both very good CIOs. We're just different CIOs. Right. And I wouldn't go mentor someone at a financial services company. I'm like they have a different set of problems, so that's not likely where I'm going to go. Right.
But we know someone that could.
we know many people that could fill these roles. Right. It's not just Paul and I that have had that experience. But I think companies really need to start thinking about that. Really need to start looking at that. And really start thinking about, what do I have? What's the most important? What's the most valuable? And I will tell you right now, if companies don't really double down on figuring out how to get longevity in the executives' seats, it's going to do nothing but continue to cause problems. Right? I'd be shocked if we couldn't add stability and the growth that companies are looking for simply by putting a long-term strategy and stability in those seats.
Right.
Knowing that the role isn't going to change humans in 2 years.
Right. But knowing that structure, decision-making, guardrails, somebody's thinking about what those mean and helping the acting CIO get to the point where they've implemented them.
Right.
Right. To say, hold on a second, like grabbing them by the shirt, right? Say, you're about to fall here.
Yep.
Note this thing in front of you now. All right, now I'm going to let you go. Walk over it.
Yep. Yeah, and it probably isn't any more expensive.
Right.
All in all. Right. First off, professional CXOs, right, those that are hired to take those roles from company to company, are incredibly expensive. Promoting someone from within is almost always cheaper.
Of course it is.
They just don't have that same expectation of remuneration. And so the first year, I would argue, sure, it might be more expensive. But in the second year, right, like let's say the first year, you need that pro CIO 100% of their time.
Right.
That's reasonable. Fine. The second year, you need them 70% of their time. The third year, you need them 25% of their time. You know what I mean? And so you can kind of cross the chasm by going, I don't give the new CIO, right, the person I've promoted from within, 100% of the pay bump. Like I grow them into the role, and as I grow them into the role, and I pull money away from hours on the consulting, I add money to their bucket, so that by the time the transition's done, right, that advisor CIO has moved on to their next gigs, right, and the new CIO is capable of doing the job and likely doing it at about 60% of what you would have paid a professional CIO.
Yep.
And
significantly better than they would have had you left them on their own.
Or hired a professional CIO who's only going to be there for 2 years.
Right.
Now you have someone that's likely come up through your organization, been there 10, 12, 15 years, knows the organization, knows the players real well, right? Did the work, earned the promotion, and now has the knowledge and the experience necessary to be the expert that you need, right? Be that 70th percentile. You're not going to get to 100% in 2 years. There's too much. It's too big a job. It's too big a role. But you can get to 70%, which is where you need them to be. Right. And at the same time, if you use the right consulting organization to do it, they're also going to go, hey, by the way, it's more than just a CIO problem. Let's look at your operating model, right? Let's look at your ways of doing business. Let's look at your strategy and your capabilities and make sure that you've got a good map and a good strategy for the next 5 years. Put that in place. And maybe you retain them. Maybe you keep them on at 10 or 20%, for the rest of those 5 years, and use them as a trusted advisor, right? But that's really the kind of thing that I would start doing. It would be a huge cost savings. It'd be a massive benefit. It would add a whole lot of structure, and it fulfills the promise you make when you hire people, which is you will have a future here. And it says no future is off the table. Right. It may not be available to everyone because you have one CIO. You know what I mean? You don't have 70. But it is possible, and it is retained by someone that actually started, at 7 levels down or 4 levels down, right?
And even if you augment it slightly to say, not only is this person going to help you with this acting CIO, but also their second in command, like the three of you are working together, you actually are not only creating the future CIO, but the future CIO.
Correct. And you're establishing a cultural pattern that will continue long after they're gone. Right. Because that becomes part of the job.
Right.
Creating your second in command should be part of the job. Paul, you have the same problem with people saying they don't have a second in command that I do. It's the first thing I do when I go to an organization. I know who my second in command is.
Literally the first thing I do. Yeah.
Correct. And there's never a question. Like I make it clear in my leadership meetings who my second in command is.
Right.
It's just
sitting beside me.
Correct. Right.
All right. Carlos, we went very long on this one, but I think it was pretty helpful.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. And make sure that you go to the sweetspotconsulting.com and you actually sign up so we can go and help you to build that team so you can grow. And make sure you subscribe. So we'll see you on our next episode.